So I raised my hands. I put my hands in front of my face, and I could not see my hands. So
Hmm.
I got scared because I imagined, wow, this is so dark that if someone is standing close to me, I won't even see him. All of a sudden, I was no longer in my body. I was in everything and in complete darkness. And when I grew enough, I sort of exploded. And I found myself, now this is the really difficult part to explain. I found myself in the middle of a universe made of light. It was like being in the center of a star.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today, I'm really excited. I've been wanting to do this interview for a while. I have AJ Parr with us today. He is one of the founders or the founder of a Facebook group that I joined around near-death experiences, and we'll talk a little bit about that. He also has written over 20 books and around consciousness and near-death experiences and all these different types of spiritual topics. His newest book is called The Girl Who Visited Heaven, and I think it does focus around children. So I'm excited to talk about that. And he himself has had a near-death like experience. So we're gonna also chat about that. So AJ, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks, Joe, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I've been excited to talk to you, and I was actually interested in this part of it too. And I always ask this in the beginning of any interview I have, is you clearly had an experience that may have shifted the way that you look at life. And I'm wondering if, as a child growing up, if you always felt this way towards the spiritual realm, or if it was that experience that changed things for you.
Well, as a child, I used to have lucid dreams. This was something that happens spontaneously. I used to have nightmares when I was around 7 years old. And one day I was having this nightmare that was repetitive. I found myself on the top of a building that was under construction. So whenever I looked down, I froze, I literally froze. I was really scared. So once I had this repetitive dream and I said, hey, this looks just like my dream.
Mm.
Maybe it is a dream. And then I realized I was dreaming and I was within the dream. So when you become conscious within a dream, that's what they call lucid dreaming. So I said, well, if it's a dream, I'll jump. So I jumped off the building and as I fell, I said, I want to stop falling. And I couldn't. So I said, well, okay, I want to be sitting in a sofa. And all of a sudden a sofa appeared and I was sitting on the sofa, but I continued to fall.
Oh,
And I
wow.
couldn't stop it. And I said, well, I want to be reading a comic book. And a comic book appeared. And I continued to fall. I was sitting on a sofa with a comic book. And I said, okay, I want the sofa to bounce once I get to the bottom. And the sofa, when I reached the bottom, bounced. And then I learned how to wake up. I could not change my dreams completely, but every time I had a nightmare, and and every time I had the chance to realize that I was dreaming, I could either wake up or change a few things.
Mm.
So that continues up to now. Every once in a while, I'm dreaming, and I realize that I'm dreaming. And when I realize that I'm dreaming, I can do things, and it's sometimes it's positive, and other times I just need to, get out. If it's a nightmare, I basically concentrate and wake up.
Wow. Okay, so as a child, you were already discovering this, that you had this ability of kind of
Yeah,
manipulating your dreams a little bit.
right. So this happened when I was 7 years old, and I've had like a spiritual quest, or I the fact that I wanted to understand what was going on, and the fact that sometimes I asked to meet guides, and I asked to see God, and these type of dreams. It led me to start researching. Since I
Okay.
was a teenager, I explored different religions. So I went on with my normal life. I hardly ever spoke about this with anyone. I didn't know about lucid dreaming until a few years ago. So this was something that I assumed that everybody had, and I didn't even discuss it with my parents or with anyone. It was just something that happened. But I really did, when I was 16, 17 years old, I joined a group, a meditation group. It was called the Mission of the Divine Light. It was founded by Guru Maharaji, who was native from India, and he taught different meditation techniques. So I started meditating when I was around 16, 17. And after meditating, I also had more dreams, you know.
Mhm.
So I stopped meditating for years because it was too intense, I really didn't know how to explain it or which path to follow. So I tried to have a normal life. I got married and all that. But when I was 34 years old, when I was 33 years old, I expected to have a super experience because Jesus died when he was 33. So I said, okay,
Right.
by the time I'm 33, I hope at least I've had a realization or enlightenment. Or so when I turned 34, I got mad at God and I had like a discussion. And I told him, look, I'm not going to look anymore for you. I'm not going to search. I'm 34 now. I was supposed to arrive at some type of experience at
Mm.
33. So I'm fed up. I'm not going to even try anymore. So I got mad at God and had this big discussion out loud for around half an hour. I'm fed up, leave me alone, and all those things. Because I really felt that my dreams and all that were disturbing. So why send them to me if you're not going to give me,
Right.
an experience? So around 2 weeks later, uh, uh, I woke up in the middle of the night. When I woke up in the middle of the night, everything was completely dark. It was pitch dark. You know that when you wake up in the middle of the night in your room, you can more or less see something. You can recognize that you're in your room. But this time it was pitch black. So I raised my hands. I put my hands in front of my face, and I could not see my hands. So
Mm.
I got scared because I imagined, wow, this is so dark that if someone is standing close to me, I won't even see him. If I can't see my hands, I won't be able to see anything. I need to get out of here. So I focused, I concentrated, and I woke up. And I said, wow, this was weird. So when I woke up, I took a deep breath. It was like I had been holding my breath. Okay, so the following night, I had the same experience. I woke up in this pitch black darkness. I looked at my hands. I couldn't see them, and I decided to stay a little bit longer. I got scared, but I wanted to see, is there someone there? I didn't ask, but it was so scary. It's like when a kid goes into a dark room, the kid will imagine anything. So I was in this pitch dark space, and I tried to stay for a few seconds, but I got scared. I felt the presence. I felt a presence. So I left. The third night, it happened again. And okay, I tried to see my hands. I knew I was in the same place. And I was about to leave because I was convinced that there was a presence. And there was, because I heard a voice that said, surrender or relax. This was in Spanish, tranquilo. All is one.
Mm.
When I heard all is one, I thought to myself, well, if all is one, maybe the person who's speaking is me, and maybe, okay, I'll trust. And I relaxed, and the fear that I felt in my chest, when you're afraid, this is something I realized right then. When you're afraid, you feel like an emptiness in your chest. It's similar to, when you're in a car and go over a bump, you feel that emptiness expanding, okay, in your chest. Or when you're jumping and falling, you feel that emptiness in your chest. It's very similar to fear. But I felt that continued to expand. I felt my chest expanding, and I said, okay, if I'm no longer afraid, why is this growing? This sensation, this emptiness in my chest.
Right.
And it continued growing, it continued growing, it grew larger than myself, larger than my house. All of a sudden, I was no longer in my body, I was in everything and in complete darkness. And when I grew enough, I sort of exploded. And I found myself, now this is the really difficult part to explain. I found myself in the middle of a universe made of light. It was like being in the center of a star. There was light in all directions. I could see up, down, to the right, to the left. I had no body. I could see each ray of light infinitely expanding in all directions. I could see between each ray and the next a small empty space. So I could see and feel the light expanding in all directions. So I felt like full of light, and also I could feel the empty space in which that light was. So I was full and empty at the same time. It's like when you have a glass of water, the water is filling the empty space that is made of the glass. The glass has an empty space. So I could feel the emptiness and the fullness at the same time. I could not think. The sound was like a storm, wind, really loud, and it was overwhelming.
Hmm.
I did feel that I was one with everything. Bliss. I felt uh, I felt that I was one with it all. And I also focused on the center of this star, and I could see that the center of the star was exactly the empty space I felt in my heart. That was the center of the star, that empty space in my chest. I can still feel it. So that empty space was the center of that star. But if I focused, I could see each ray. I could see each ray in the middle or in the end. I could see them infinitely expanding. Wherever I focused my attention, I would see that part, but I would still see everything. So I don't know how long I was there. All I know is that I had no thoughts, I had no body, and I was all. When I woke up, all of a sudden in my bed, I took a deep breath. Later, I found out that I had sleep apnea. This is when you stop breathing during the night. I also suffered from asthma since I was a child. And I really don't know what happened. Maybe I stopped breathing, maybe not. But when I got back, apart from taking a deep breath, I still felt that I was there. I still felt surrounded by this oneness. I felt that I was no longer my body, that I was expanding in all directions. So I couldn't understand it. And I woke up and I placed my hand against the wall. And I felt that I was my hand pressing against the wall, but I was also the wall pressing back. I could feel myself in those two places at the same time. It was like double consciousness. But that wore out in 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
I did have like I asked God or the universe or this oneness. I didn't know what to call it. It has no name. I asked for an explanation. I got like a download, a very small poem that says something like this. In the beginning was the one, but the one was alone and wanted to play. So the one divided himself into two and gave number two amnesia, and thus the game began.
Mm.
So that was the explanation. It was telling me that we are all God with amnesia. We have forgotten we are God. We the that it was also telling me that everything is one. This whole creation is one. It's non-dual,
Mm.
and we are also, people. Many religions say that we have a spark of God within us. Well, that more or less explains it. So I only had that explanation, and I went out. I had never heard of this before. No religion mentioned this, but I did. After that day, I picked up the Gospels, and I could tell when Jesus was referring to this, and when the scriptures had been manipulated.
Okay.
He does talk about oneness. He does talk about non-duality. He does say that this is an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
He established a difference between the world of heaven and the mundane world of this world of desires and illusions. Okay, and so those Buddha and Krishna and all of them. So I started researching religions, trying to find if someone else had had a similar experience. And years later, I'm a journalist. I met a Spanish journalist who had had a near death experience. And she told me that she had also been in that dark space, which they call the void. She had also merged with the light, and she had what they call 360-degree vision, which allows you to see in all directions at the same time. And I decided to research near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I did find many people. I decided as a journalist to interview people. I started out watching videos, but I said, no, okay, I need to speak directly with people. And I did find a lot of people who went to that dark space, and who merged with the light. They had 360-degree visions, and they had this oneness experience. So based on that, I concluded that I had had a near-death, what they call a near-death-like experience. And I wrote my first NDE book, which is called Stairway to Heaven. I found the commonalities of heavenly near-death experiences based on 25 near-death experiences that I studied. 15 of them were people I had interviewed. This was when I barely had when I was 6 months into my research. I wrote this book. So I found that most of the people who have had heavenly near-death experiences, which I define as having encounters with God, Jesus, or paradise, have a meeting with the light. They meet with the light. Another commonality is hearing God's voice. And the rest of the commonalities I did not experience, but many people say that they visit the lobby of heaven, that they have a life review, that they are given the chance to return or to stay. Some of them are shown the future. Some of them receive a mission, and they are actually sent back with a mission. And practically all of them suffer a transformation.
Mhm.
Some of them see Jesus, or they see light beings or dead relatives. So these are the basic commonalities I found. And after that, uh, I published this book and I sent it to the Dr. Melvin Morse, who wrote the foreword. And after that, I've been obsessed with near-death experiences, you know.
Right. Well, that's something we both have in common. So, uh, first of all, thanks for sharing a lot of your experience. I have a few questions to go down, so we're gonna do that. It's really interesting. First of all, when I first started talking to you before we interviewed, that you also have been or are a musician. You've been in bands when you were younger. We talked about that a little bit. So it's funny. The interest is common. Artistic people, sometimes we tend to be a little more, um, we question a lot of things in life a little more. We're more, I find a lot of just dealing with people on a daily basis from teaching musicians and things like that. We're a lot of feelers. I'm sure everybody out there, audience is listening. A lot of my audience, our audience, are feeler type people, people who are questioning the universe, questioning what life is. But I found it interesting that you also have been in the arts and done music and things like that. And then here you are having this experience and then going down the direction of interviewing or being a journalist towards people who've had near-death experiences, which again, commonality. I think the episode that we're doing right now, maybe about the 60th or 65th. So I've spoke with a lot of people too now and read thousands of books. Maybe I came across one of your books over the years because I don't know. I just started becoming obsessive in my young childhood around 16 or 17 about what the purpose of life is. I was going through a hard time and I remember one day, I'd say this a lot of my episodes, I was walking and I was looking at my hands and I was like, what is this? And I was having this kind of out of body. I didn't remember seeing myself out of body, but it was like I didn't understand my existence and I questioned everything from that point on. And then have had some spiritual experiences. But I do appreciate you talking about what happened to you. It's interesting to wonder if you did have a near death like experience, or if you actually did have a near death experience, if you suffered from sleep apnea and asthma. I had asthma as a kid too, and I know that there was a few times where I'd wake up out of breath, and so I understand what that can feel like. So you never know. You could have just jumped out for a moment, and as we know through interviewing people, you can be gone for 3 seconds here and feel like 1,000 years over on the other side. So everything just time shifts completely, right? So, one of the main questions I want to ask you, I'm going to go down a few, is you woke up in this blackness. And I remember at first you talked about you were trying to refer or you were trying to give some kind of reference of what that feeling. You went around you said fear a little bit at first. There was this fear feeling. And you went from fear at one point in your story to bliss. And I'm wondering when that shifted. When did it go from fear to bliss, if you can recall that at all?
Well, I was feeling fearfulness in my chest, and when I heard the voice, "All is one," I relaxed. But the feeling in my chest continued to grow, this emptiness. So I said to myself, "Wow, if I'm no longer afraid, why is this continuing to expand? Why is this expanding? Why do I feel that I'm even more scared?" And at that moment, I realized that it was not fear, it was an emptiness, and it was the same emptiness in the chest that we feel that when we are falling. So I decided to go along with it and see what happened, you know?
Wow.
But at that moment, I was no longer afraid.
So you seem to get trust once you heard the voice. A trust came over you and you allowed the
Yes.
trust to overtake the fear.
I don't know if I voluntarily trusted or
Mm.
just when I heard that, all is one, it made me trust. It made me relax. it made me surrender. Because I was, when you're afraid, you're like resisting. Okay, you
Right.
resist. But when I heard all this one, I stopped resisting.
Right.
And I like let it be, let it be. That's the attitude.
Yeah, one of the fascinating parts about your description of that is I've spoke with a few people and seen videos of people who've passed away, and it's horrible way to pass, I would think, is through drowning. And often a commonality is they're struggling, there's a fear. I need to get to the water, I can see the light. I can't get up. I'm stuck under a rock, whatever the situation is. And there's panic and fear and you know, and then all of a sudden there's this giving in. There's this, you know what? Okay, I'm going to take a breath. And you can't
Surrender.
breathe underwater. You're surrendering. And the surrender then turns to beauty. All of a sudden, they're out of their body immediately. I've seen that. I've heard of this, seen this, talked to people a number of times. The pain goes because you're now out of your body. I mean, you're no longer, you know, some of them have even looked down and still seeing their body doing the things that it does, but they're no longer in there. And the way that you're describing it, although you weren't drowning or anything, you were going through something where you kind of did stop resisting it and just allowing it to kind of just overtake you or something. So that's where I see the similarity in what you experience. That's why it is very much like a near-death experience. Um, you were just doing it already from somewhere else in your consciousness, I guess.
Yeah, well, the fact that I cannot prove it, it does not allow me to say it is a near-death experience
Right.
because I would be criticized or doubted. So I prefer not to, not to even question it. I've known other people like Betty Guadagno who had a near-death-like experience, and there are some other people who have not actually died and have had these type of experiences. So I'm okay.
Well, what's interesting though, again, because we're calling it a near-death like experience, right? And then you have the people who have the near-death experience. And because of the similarities of what you experienced, it almost shows you how sensitive this life really is. I mean, there are people who've trained themselves to be able to jump out of their body all the time and they're living still, right?
Right.
And that's a whole other realm. And some of them have jumped out and they see this cord and they think, well, if that cord's gone, I'm gone. So I got to stick, this cord's got to still stay with me. So there's this connection that they still want. They don't all experience that, but I've heard that a number of times as well. And so I don't know where the actual where the change happens between a near-death experience and a near-death like, because the near-death like experiences have so many similarities. And then it
Yeah.
really makes me question what we really are, right? And I wanted to mention this. Something hit me really strongly. You mentioned everything was coming from your chest. This feeling of expansion was all coming from your chest, your expansion, right? And our heart's in our chest. And immediately I thought, this must be, if I were to, I mean, our soul is bigger than us, I would assume, but there's something about the chest. I hear this all
Yeah.
the time. There's some kind of connection we have to our heart chakra or our chest with our soul, because you immediately went there and you didn't say, oh, I was coming out of my, no one ever does this. No one ever says, I mean, yeah, they leave their head sometimes, but they always feel it from here. So what do you believe this is about, if you were to take a guess?
Well, if you or the people who are watching this do this experiment, they will realize something. There was an Indian sage called Ramana Maharshi, and he had a technique which is called "Who am I?" meditation. Okay, so if you try to respond to the following question without using words, ask yourself, "Who am I?" and try to feel, "Who am I?" The answer will come from the chest.
Hmm.
When you say me, you touch your chest. I will do this, and you touch your chest.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
When you, I don't know if you've, when you are a musician, when you are improvising, you're no longer thinking.
Hmm.
You're one with everything, and in your chest, you can feel that connection with your unconscious.
Right.
Okay. And I believe that our unconscious leads to our spirit or our soul. I also believe that dreams, there are two types of dreams: normal dreams and spiritual dreams. We have seen in the Bible and in other scriptures that the angels communicate with humans through dreams. God talks to people through dreams.
Hmm.
So there is a connection between our unconscious and dreams with the spiritual world. And also, when you are creating something, a musician or an artist, a sculptor, when you're in that trance that you reach when you're improvising or when you're playing, and all of a sudden you are no longer, your hands are moving by themselves, and you're just practically a spectator. You're hearing yourself
Hmm.
play, and you know that all this is coming from your soul, from within. You've had that
Oh,
experience, right?
yes. Yes. Yeah. Many
Okay.
a times. Yeah. And it feels like it's coming, it's expanding this way. I've never felt, oh, my mind is like, you never feel it from that way. And I love how you said, if someone says who, if you point to yourself, no one ever says, this is me.
Yeah.
No, you go, yeah, this is me.
Yeah, me.
So,
Who did
right,
this? I did.
right, right. You don't go, I did.
Right.
No, no, you're right. I don't think I've ever felt that way or seen anyone do that. And that makes perfect sense. So we're indicating something. And yes, we have the heart. A science type person might say maybe it's based around the heart. But
Well, the heart said it is said that the heart has a certain percentage of neurons, that there is some sort of intelligence. I believe the part of the unconscious lies within our heart. And in ancient times, in the times of Jesus and Rome and ancient Greece, they thought the heart was the part of the human being that originated thinking instead of the brain.
wow.
The Egyptians also thought the heart was the thinking organ, you know?
Well, that makes sense then because they were more in tune with spirit. I mean, we are now, we're getting back to it, but there's plenty of ancient civilizations that had a stronger sense of where we go when we die, right?
Right.
And so they likely thought that our thoughts were coming, our feelings, everything was just coming from here. Until we got into, you know, looking at the brain and understanding a lot of the thoughts that come from it. So, well, that's fascinating. I just wanted to know that about that because you were expanding from here. Um, and then, because right away I was like, I almost feel like the chest is the key to the soul, but then others say that the soul is bigger than our body. It's like we're trying to fit in this. I don't know whether we're trying to fit a soul into our body or if our body is surrounding our soul.
Well, I think we are in this 3D world, but at the same time we are in this other dimension in
Mhm.
which we are larger than our bodies. So I was really blown away by my experience and also by near-death experiences. And there are a lot of people who say that near-death experiences are not don't have anything to do with the spiritual world, that there are a biological reaction caused by the lack of oxygen or by drugs, and that people who have had near-death experiences are influenced by their culture and by their religious beliefs. And this is true. A lot of people, for example, Christians will see Jesus if they see a divine being or a deity, and there other people will see Buddha or Krishna, or, they will see their own uh, deities. However, when I started studying children, because children, especially those under age 5,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that they have not had time to be, programmed.
Mm-hmm.
Social programming has not yet taken place. So I started interviewing. When I did my regular interviews, every once in a while I would get someone who had had a childhood near-death experience. For example, Ingrid Honkala had a near-death experience at age 2, and she remembered it.
Wow.
Jacob Cooper had his near-death experience at age 3, and he remembered it. Dr. Brian Sackett at age 3, Mark Anthony, the famous psychic medium, was 4 years old, and that marked his life. And I interviewed different people who were age 5, and of the 12 people I mentioned in my latest book, The Girl Who Visited Heaven, I mentioned 12 near-death experience cases of people who had their NDEs as a child. Most of them are under age 5, and only 5 of them are between age 7 and 9. But 7 of them are age 5 or younger. So these kids had not been trained or had not received a formal religious education, and yet they did see, some of them saw Jesus, some of them had those 9 common elements. Even you might even ask yourself, how can a kid have a life review?
Right.
Some of them did have a life review. And amazingly, Jacob Cooper, who was age 3, his life review did not only cover his present life, it covered his previous life in which he committed
Wow.
suicide. So he was shown that he had come back,
Mm-hmm.
okay, after having committed suicide. And he was also shown scenes from his future where he would be helping people. He saw himself in a stage talking about sharing to the world that death is not the end.
Right.
And he became he is like a past life regressionist and a spiritual healer. Uh, he helps people in many ways. But amazingly, most of these kids saw the light. They heard a voice. They had a past life review. These kids, age 5 or younger, were given the chance to return or to stay. Some of them were sent back with the mission of telling the world that death is not the end, and all of them suffered a transformation. PMH Atwater, who together with Dr. Melvin Morse are the pioneer researchers in this field, she concluded that adults who have had a near-death experience take maybe 10 or 20 years to process this
Mm-hmm.
and to share it with the world. A lot of people have this experience, they don't understand it, and years go by until they discover NDEs. But kids take between 30 and 40 years to process it. It's
Mm-hmm.
even longer. Some of them, like Ingrid Honkala, at age 3, she could read and write. She could solve complex puzzles. They acquire a higher intelligence,
Right.
just like adults. When they come back, some of them acquire they have healing powers and or higher intelligence. Melvin Morse did a study with kids who had heart arrest,
Mhm.
and he found that among the kids that had this NDE, 50% of the kids made a decision to return. They could choose between returning or staying. 70% of the kids who had a heart arrest had visions of leaving their bodies, and this is something common in both adults and kids. The book is called "The Girl Who Visited Heaven" because the first scientifically studied case of a child who had a near-death experience took place in 1984. So I interviewed this 7-year-old kid who is now, you know, not no longer a kid, but I interviewed her. Her name is Crystal Merlock, and I interviewed her, and the doctor, she was found dead in a swimming pool. She drowned, and she was resuscitated by a young doctor called Dr. Melvin Morse, who actually became my mentor, and he has helped me, uh, with my research. So he resuscitated her, and she spent 3 days in coma. And the next time Dr. Melvin saw her, he thought that she would have brain damage because she
Mhm.
was 20 minutes dead, clinically dead. When he saw her the next time by chance he saw her at the hospital, she was perfect. So he said, "Wow, how come? I mean, he expected her to have mental problems." And he asked her, "Do you remember what happened in the pool?" And her answer was, "You mean when I met Jesus and the Heavenly Father?"
Hmm. Wow.
He was not expecting that answer, and he's a skeptic. He was a skeptic, and he
Mhm.
said, "Wow, what do you mean?" And he tried to ask her more about that, but she she didn't say anything else. But he talked to her mother, and he made an appointment, and he started meeting with her, and she did tell him her story, which I mentioned in the book. She was aware. She she supposedly was resuscitated and was 3 days in coma, but she knew what happened. I mean, when she saw him, she told her mother, "Hey, that's the man who brought me back to life, mother." She told her mother, "He's the one with the beard. There was another one that had no beard." And Dr. Melvin Morse, was blown away because
Right.
how could she know that if she was in coma or dead? Then he made a phone call to since he was a young doctor, he made a phone call to seeking advice from his superiors. And she also told him, "Yeah, you made that phone call." And also, when you intubate someone, you put a tube down the throat, but for some reason, he could not stick the tube down her throat. So he intubated her through the nose. And she told him, "Yeah, you put those tubes down my nose." So,
Wow. And this is while she was
yeah, she was
not
dead
here.
or unconscious. Yes.
Right. Wow.
And those things, when he found out about those things, he decided to first he published the first scientific article on her case, but he was still a skeptic. So
Mhm.
he organized a study to prove that this was mere, illusion or fantasies.
Mhm.
And he interviewed a whole bunch of kids, and he became a believer. He he finally concluded that these kids did have a contact uh, with the other world, the other side.
Yeah, and this would have been in the 80s. So Dr. Moody's book, I don't know what year that came out, the
In
original.
1975, it was written and it came out in 1976.
Right. So this wasn't long after that. So this was still a new way of looking at things for us.
Right,
Right.
right.
Right. Right. So as that, and then he started getting in. See, I didn't know, I know about Dr. Moody. I didn't know much about Dr. Morse. So and you said, I think you're part of the ISSC. What is that again? And who is part of that? Could you
Okay,
explain
the
that?
ISSC is the Institute for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. This is an institute organized or led by Dr. Melvin Morse.
Okay.
And Dr. Melvin Morse, his mentor, but since the 80s, was Raymond Moody.
Right.
Because when he started researching kids, he was contacted by Dr. Raymond Moody, and they have been friends and collaborators ever since. So the Institute for the Scientific Study of Consciousness is led by Dr. Melvin Morse, but Dr. Moody is part of the counseling team, the team of counselors, and I am a consciousness researcher working for them, and so are other members of a selected team. And we have been most recently, we have been working on a study on mediumship. But
Okay.
that's another
Yeah.
completely different topic. But
Yeah.
scientific mediumship,
But
this
it's all
is
surrounding the idea of consciousness, and
yes,
because we are now at this point where I feel like we're trying to understand how consciousness really works. Not to go too far back, because I do want to mention one other thing about Dr. Moody. But when you had your experience and then you came back and you put your hand up against the wall and the wall was pushing back, you said, I really liked how you described that because it was as if you were, remember how I talked about when I started kind of questioning my hands and, um, because you had just come back from your trip, let's call it, it was almost like the 3D was coming back online, but you weren't completely integrated back here. So you were still feeling the wholeness of who you were while the physical was coming back. And what I found interesting about what you said about the wall pushing back on you is you realized likely in that moment, see, right now we think this is us, right? Like
right.
this is me. But if you're actually aware of the wall pushing back on you while you're pushing on the wall, you are no longer just your body. So you were separated to a point where you were just in awareness of everything in the physical that we were creating. Um, and that is wild. That just when you said it like that, because I thought because you said it took about 3 days or so, or 3 or 4 days to that kind of left. You eventually felt like you were
Yeah,
back here completely. But there
right.
was a moment where you were there and here. Just the awareness of there and the realization of here, of the physical again. Is that kind of what was going on? I just wanted to
Well,
make
if we believe that all is one, okay, which was my final conclusion is all is one, then there is no place for individuality. So this is
right.
like, they people say that this is a matrix, that this is the everything we see is an illusion. It is an illusion because we are that oneness. Everything is one.
Hmm.
So there cannot be different individuals. That's why some religions say, you are me and I am you, and we are all the same consciousness. There's only one consciousness,
Hmm.
the universal consciousness. So if you are aware of that you are one, the limit between your individual person or personality dissolves.
Right.
When you're when you love someone and you kiss that person or you're making love, the boundaries between you and that other person dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Also, when you're, like I said, when you're improvising and playing music, you are that music.
Mm-hmm.
The boundaries between your individual personality dissolve. When you're watching an impressive sunrise or sunset, all of a sudden you feel larger than what you are. All of a sudden you forget that you are an individual.
Mm-hmm.
You're overwhelmed by what you're watching. Okay.
Yeah. And you were experiencing that. See, I think that in itself is beautiful because it is amazing to feel oneness with everything. But then there's a part of us that wants to continue our individuality, and that's maybe part of the ego that keeps us here. That fear starts to pick up, like, what do you mean? I'm me, right? I tend to, just my own feeling. I always use my hand as the example, but if that is our oneness, and then we have our individual, right? So we are all part of this, but it's to expand this, we are having our individual experiences and going back and every experience that we have is expanding this oneness. And that's why the story about the child who remembered the suicide and coming back, they are having a personal growth that's happening, right? Maybe they came back to experience more. I don't know the whole story behind that, but maybe someone can read it in your book. But if the person's if they've taken their own life, but they didn't get through the experiences that they wanted to do here to help expand the growth of oneness, then they're now coming back. All of a sudden they're back again. Okay, I got to do this again because I have this mission, I have this blueprint, I have this thing that I came here to do. So I do believe that the reason I'm saying this is I've spoke with a number of people who have literally a fear around the loss of their themselves. Like for me to say that you and I are the same right now, that can really blow someone's mind. Because then you go, well, what about me, my individual? So I do believe that in our holiness, in our amazing oneness, we give ourselves the opportunity to come and experience singularity, to have that singularity. So I do think there might be something we're growing with, but it's almost like that's me and you, like that's me and you, but we're also part of this. So we can continue this many times as we want to grow, but the idea is to get to here. So am I off too much,
Well,
or do you feel
no,
different than what I'm saying?
I understand. I've used that example also. And
Mm,
we are fingers of the same hand. But remember, what I was told is that this oneness wanted to play.
mm,
So if they say God is all powerful, almighty. So why shouldn't God experience multiplicity and experience being you, being me, being a rock, being a tree? He wanted to experience everything. He is unlimited possibilities. So he simply, as I was told, divided himself into multiple consciousness and gave himself amnesia. Why did he give himself amnesia? To fully live our lives as independent beings.
mhm.
Because if we knew that we are God, then it wouldn't be a game. It's like playing hide and seek and knowing where the person is hiding. No, the game is hide and seek. Who is hiding? God, which is you. So
Oh, I
that's
like that. That's a really good analogy. And then it gets really, we can go down a whole other area and probably save it for another episode, but of other beings and other entities and different planets and all these different things, because there is this belief system by many people that have experienced that these other entities uh, do understand that they are God better than we are because they've existed longer. So their the hide and seek game isn't really going anymore, and they kind of understand, but they still have purpose. There's still something to their existence. There's still purpose, but they're not as much in the dark. We're really in the dark here on Earth. Human beings are really in the dark. We really are separated, not separated from God, but um, we're far from the understanding of what we really are, so that it's almost like we come here to try to find that again. It's almost like that's part of the game, is to try to understand that we are something bigger. And I think the fear around it comes from the feeling of, okay, if I'm Joe, you're AJ, and if we just exist but then leave and then just dissolve into God, that doesn't sound great at all. That's why, to me, I feel like we still have individuality somewhere within it, because
Oh, yeah.
God has the idea, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like when people have near-death experiences and they come into their bodies and they get this like replenishing. They go to God, God like bathes them in love and light, and they come back and they're able to come back. And there is this like still this sense of individuality even in the soul realm, and they come back. So there's something, it's almost like I would almost look like an octopus with legs. Like there's like we are still part of something, and the fear of just dissolving away and Joe never existing, or the idea of what Joe was, or the soul of Joe, or the soul of AJ. I I think that there's a fear around that because we're here.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't think we will dissolve into oneness uh, ever. I mean, time does not exist. We have to remember that. You know, Einstein proved that time does not exist. So this is an illusion, and as long as there is time, we will be, we will have individuality.
Mm,
Even, when these aliens or angels, they have less individuality. They behave more like a group consciousness, but they still have part of themselves which are individuals. And when people who have had a near-death experience go to heaven, they see their past, their deceased relatives.
mhm,
They see their great grandfather. I recently interviewed a guy who had a near-death experience, and he met this old man with white beard who helped him through his journey. And when he came back, he spoke to his grandmother, and he saw a picture of this guy, and she told him it was his great grandfather.
mhm,
So these people after death remain
mhm,
with their consciousness, and they also reincarnate. So
mhm.
the game, this hide and seek game, will never end. I mean, it
Right.
will never end. It's an endless game. That's the game.
Yeah. And as you were talking there, I kind of felt something more, and I'm just going to share because I'm feeling it. And I never know if this is really authentic or not, but this is what I feel. God is creation, right? So the energy of God, let's make this the energy of God, this whole ball, okay, is creation. And God wanted to experience separateness like we're having. So he created a piece of himself to come here, right? AJ, Joe, everybody else listening. So he's created that off of himself. So that's created, and energy can't be destroyed. So you've created this energy. Now we come here. Now we're part of God. And I think we can be oneness with God if we feel like we want to. I almost feel like it's like, when people say they go home, I wonder if that's the idea of we come here and we experience our life, and we're having this life, and then, okay, I'm going home now for a while. And going home is going back to the oneness of God. But then if you want to re-experience, you're not gone. You don't dissolve into nothingness. That's the part that gets me. I've had a few people mention it kind of like that. And I'm like, I don't feel that. I don't feel like, because once you're created, you're created. You won't just go and just suck back in and you're gone. You don't exist. I think that there's this creation, and then that's creation. It's done. You've been created specifically from God, and that's why it's a blessing, right? And you come here and we experience this, and then we can go back. Uh, that's the way I feel it. That just feels right for me. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah,
Disclaimer,
well,
but it
I
feels right.
feel the same way. We we are who we are, and we at the same time we are oneness, but the point of existence is enjoying this individuality. I also believe that people who say, no, the ego they blame the ego for everything. But thanks to the ego, we are who we are. So the ego
Right.
is a necessary part. Without an ego, we would not eat, we would not do anything. We would, remain
Mm-hmm.
in bliss 24 hours a day, and we would die of inanition. So the ego has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Believing that we are who we are has a purpose. We need that in order to function in life, to eat, to go and have our own existence. So blaming the ego is something I don't agree with. Now, it's like fire. You can use fire for good things or for bad things. You can burn a school, okay, but you can also cook. So the ego is the same thing. It's neither good or bad. You can use it for good things, and you can
Mm-hmm.
use it for bad things. So,
Right.
uh,
No, I love that the ego has a purpose. That might be the headliner because it's something that we are in a weird space right now where, I watch a lot of people who've done ayahuasca and they have this magical experience and they go, and I'm very happy for them. They needed that. If I ever felt like I was at a point in my life where I needed an ayahuasca trip, I'll go do it. I do know that the ayahuasca can break down the ego. So your ego disappears and they go into what we would probably refer to as psychosis. So if you don't have your ego, it is like a psychosis. I don't mean just from the brain. I mean, if you're just at oneness with everything, you're right. We would just be sitting here. We wouldn't have any purpose to anything we're doing. So the ego is important. I completely agree with that. I remember when I first started going down the spiritual journey in my early 20s, I remember I was thinking to myself, um, I got to get the loss of this ego. I got to completely destroy my ego because my ego, especially as a musician, right? Just get rid of it. I don't need it. Well, I don't know who I'd be then because like that is the why we have the ego is to keep ourselves grounded to this existence. You experienced dreamlike experiences when you were younger, right? You had these dreamlike experiences. And then you had this spiritual experience, this near-death like experience. Right away, just from your heart, from yourself, what you feel, did one of them feel more real than here? Did your dream feel as real as your experience? What was the feeling of it? I always say, with the near-death experiences, one of the questions I ask is how real did it feel?
well, the actual being in that space in which I was light, it was more real than real. It was another dimension. The fact that I could see up and down, to right to left in all directions, makes make it makes it beyond 3D. So one thing that I learned intuitively is that there is something larger than 3D, because in 3D we can only see to the front, and if you're watching, in front of us, we don't see what's behind us. But in that space, I could see in all directions. It's like taking a chair. In 3D, you see a chair, okay? But in that other dimension, it's like you can see a chair from all directions at the same time.
Wow.
It's really hard to imagine or to describe. Um,
So did it feel more real than the
okay,
3D?
that part felt more real. Also, when you are, like I mentioned, there are two types of dreams. When I'm dreaming normally, and I don't realize that I'm dreaming, it doesn't look like a reality. But when I wake up in the dream, it looks real. It does look real. Um, Carl Jung, I'm sure you've heard of him, the famous psychoanalyst. He studied mystical visions and mystical dreams, and he's noticed that in mystical visions, people experience, they may see a divine being or, a deity. And he concluded that these mystical visions, they have one of the ingredients is what he called the archetypes. Everybody interprets or translates these spiritual realities in their own way. For example, an Eskimo in Alaska 3,000 years ago has a mystical experience or an NDE, and he will see the Alaskan gods, or he will see something that he's familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone in Africa 10,000 years ago, in the middle of the jungle, had an NDE or a mystical experience, he would see the African gods.
Right.
You see, he would not see he would not see Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He would
Mm-hmm.
see the African gods. We see Jesus because we are raised in this culture and we were born in this time period. But 10,000 years ago, who did people see? 3,000 years ago, they saw Apollo, and they saw, the Greek and Roman gods. The Egyptians, they did not know about Jesus, so they gave these light beings other names.
Mm-hmm.
And each time someone has a mystical dream, a mystical vision, they will see this divinity incarnated in their own way. So the archetypes have to do with NDEs, and this explains why NDEs are different. Each NDE will tell a different story, yet with common elements.
Mm-hmm.
So are
Yeah.
NDEs dreams? No, but they do have this archetypal element in them, which
Right.
is also present in mystical visions and in mystical dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they have this element? Because NDEs do not take place out of ourselves. They take place within us, within our unconscious. We if we go within,
Mm-hmm.
we'll find our unconscious, we'll find our soul, and that's where NDEs take place, in
Mm-hmm.
that dimension that is within us, where our soul lies. So it's kind of hard to explain also, but that's only my theory.
No,
You know?
I agree with it. I feel like there's some kind of memory that comes from our incarnation currently, though, because if you're having this internal experience and your body is destroyed, let's say, you're completely dead. Body is either, whatever it is, buried, whatever we do, and it starts to go. Well, where does that soul go? Where is that? And that's the internal that's here. Because even when you were saying internally in us, you were doing this again, right? So
Yeah.
I'm looking at your body. We're referring to our body, like in here. So then the person will be like, oh, so then if we're completely annihilated, does that go? And I would say, no, that doesn't make sense because the NDE experiencer, a lot of times, there's people who've been put in a body bag with a toe tag
Yeah.
and they wake up in the bag after. They're gone for a long time. They've been clinically dead. And, so it's definitely something else. But to speak on what you're saying is there's some kind of memory that seems to go with us from the current incarnation. So if the memory is of Jesus or Buddha or whatever it is in this incarnation, we're taking that with us for at least the time being. Maybe if we then reincarnate and it's 400 years from now and there's some new leader that everyone's following, I'm just making this up. That might be the new deity, the new leader of our God, right? That we are now creating in that incarnation. So there's something that goes with us. And I don't know where that memory comes from or how we take that with us, but that's the whole part that I get completely confused about. So,
Well,
but yeah,
you don't have to go 400 years into the future. You can just be born in India in a
right. That's true.
non-Christian society, and
That's true.
you'll be raised believing in some different, in Shiva, Brahma,
Yeah.
or maybe a Buddhist family, You'll
Mhm.
be raised with different spiritual values.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're wrong. I believe all religions have the same roots, and that I believe that there are good people in all religions,
Mhm.
and that the religion does not define your spiritual life. Your relationship with the spiritual universe defines your spiritual evolution. It's not a matter of belonging. If you're a Christian, you're safe. No, if you follow the teachings of Jesus, and if you really go within and get in touch with the Father, okay, you'll be saved. It's
Mhm.
it's more profound than people think.
Yeah.
It, it's a direct relationship with whoever that divinity is, and but yeah, I can sense that you've done a lot of research and have questioned a lot. And yeah, I also believe that musicians and artists are like black sheep. They go, they ask themselves questions. They don't follow the norm.
Mhm.
The society behaves like sheep, the herd.
Right.
And artists don't follow the herd. They try to make their own path.
Yeah, we do seem to be the black sheep or the oddballs out there that tend to
Yeah.
ask questions. I was always the person asking. I mean, even in my psychology classes, I'd have in university, I'd put my hand up and I'd be asking questions that were completely different, and the professor would be like, "Oh, okay, I guess we're going down that road." But yeah, but then, and just one other thing I wanted to touch on before I move on from this is that there are also the situations and the NDEs out there that are part of a different culture or belief system. And when they die, they see a different,
Yes, yes.
like the person that sees Jesus who wasn't even raised in Christianity, or the atheist that, or the, like I hear about these situations where it goes different ways. And I go, well, what does that mean? Like those ones really fascinate me too, because they weren't influenced and they still see something different than what they thought they were going to see.
Yeah, well, I believe that we cannot have the answer for all these questions, and
Right.
um, part of the game of this hide and seek game is not being able to understand
That's right.
how it works.
Right. It's the
No,
same concept that the people that have the NDEs that come back and they can't remember everything they learned. Some of it, they're like, I was told I can't come back with this because if I knew it, I'd explode. It's too much to understand. Like we're only probably scratching the surface of our understanding of it, because from here we can only understand so much.
right.
Right. So it gets really deep. If people want to find out more about you, where's the best places? I know that you have the near death experience group. It's the near death experiences and spiritual awakening group, I believe, on Facebook that you run.
Yes.
Is there other places, any other social media areas or
Well,
anything?
yeah. Basically, my most important social media is the near-death experiences and spiritual awakening Facebook group. It has over 120,000 members. I also have my YouTube channel, AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist. And I have over 180 videos there. And I over the years since I've been writing, I've met people who are interested in publishing a book. So I also have run a publishing company, and I've had the chance to publish books for near-death experiencers and for people who are spiritual, and that's what I basically do for a living. I publish books, and I not only my own books but other people's books. And I do this. I have this Facebook group and my YouTube channel as a hobby. I also have a an author page in Amazon with over 20 spiritual books about different religions and about their commonalities. And I also have an Audible author page. And if people want to contact me for any reason, feel free to do so through my Facebook account, which is AJ Parr, or you can write to me at books@gmail.com, and I'll gladly answer uh, any questions you may have. I recently imparted a workshop with Paul Perry, who is the co-author of Raymond Moody. It's a writing. It was a writing workshop for people interested in writing their NDE stories, and we are repeating that workshop every now and then. So uh, I'm more or less trapped in that world.
Right. No, I love that. And the publishing company, is it AJ Parr Books then, or what's the name of the
It's
publishing company?
Grapevine Books.
Grapevine Books.
If anyone wants more information, I'll be giving you the links.
No, that's perfect. I'm even interested in that, to be honest. So I find that of interest. You also, even with your recent book, um The Girl Who Visited Heaven, I think Dr. Moody, he even had a little bit of a say in that, didn't he?
Yeah, he wrote the foreword. Dr. Raymond Moody wrote the foreword of the my latest book, and the first book, the first NDE book, which is Stairway to Heaven, was forwarded by Dr. Melvin Morse.
Wow.
So
So these are pioneers
yeah, these are
in this
pioneers.
world, right? Yeah,
Right.
that's wow, that's great. This has been fascinating. You are definitely someone I could have on again. So I want to stay connected with you. This is great.
Yeah,
All
let's
these,
do that.
yeah. I always end every episode the exact same way, and I just ask one simple question, and it's what comes to you first. And I'm really curious about the answer that you'll have to this. And if you were to think of anything in regards to your life or everyone's lives, what is the main purpose that we incarnate in this life? Why do we come here?
Well, we come here for the experience. Whatever we do is okay. There is nothing really wrong, unless you're a really evil person. But we are all allowed to make mistakes. We are all allowed to make mistakes, to learn from our mistakes. And we are really, life is like a school. And our mission is to learn.
Hmm.
And making mistakes is part of that learning. And the human race is in its infancy. We are still learning and making mistakes. And 1,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, we may have learned many lessons and we'll be a better human race.
I love that. Let's hope so. Love the way you put that, that life is a school. I've heard that before. We come here for the experience, good and bad, right? So, and the
Right.
yeah, and our growth, I think our growth can depend on that. So I don't think that there's a purpose of, I'm not saying that what you're saying is incorrect. I believe everything you're saying. I think that if we make some decisions that maybe we want to correct, maybe it's, it can be a little more difficult if we make the wrong decisions because now we got to correct it here while we're here, or we may have to do it again. I believe in that because I really do have the true beliefs in reincarnation, just from the people I've spoke with, the people who've talked about past life regressions, the things they can
Right.
remember. But we definitely take things too serious here. I will say that. And I think that if we could just learn to experience, and I think throw some love in there, sprinkle some love in there too, and it makes things a lot easier as we go about our journey, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
This has been amazing, AJ. Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you taking the time. I generally turn to the camera and just say to everybody, please keep like, sharing, and subscribing. It's you guys that are making this soul inspired family grow. So, and I can keep having people like AJ on. And please, I would also encourage you to go check out his books, check out his YouTube page. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting interviews you've had as well. So I'm going to check some of those out. So I really appreciate you being on today.
thank you.